What's up guys, Tommy Bowyer here from Movie Rewind, and today I will be reviewing Doctor Who Series 3. There will be spoilers in this review, so without further ado, let's get into it. Doctor Who Series 3 starred David Tennant as the 10th incarnation of the Doctor and Freema Agyeman as his companion Martha Jones. It aired from the 31st of March 2007 and concluded after 13 episodes on the 30th of June 2007. And in my personal opinion, Series 3 marks the beginning of the revival's golden age. Some of the best episodes in Doctor Who history are present in this series, and therefore Series 3 is ranked very, very highly. Now, I watched Series 3 in preparation for this review. I made notes on every episode in my little black book. However, before I get into those episode reviews, I thought I would give some brief details about what I think the characters were like in this series, as well as that all-important story arc. David Tennant once again kills it as the 10th Doctor. He's perfectly cast for that role, and Series 3 does not change that. If anything, in Series 3, Tennant has more confidence than he had in Series 2. He's very, very comfortable in that role, and you can tell that he knows exactly how the Doctor would react in any given situation, which is great. However, I do think that Series 3 highlights Tennant's variety as an actor, especially his performances in Human Nature and The Family of Blood. A very different side to Tennant's acting, and he does it really, really well. So Series 3 is a good season to highlight Tennant's scope as an actor. It's so strong. He was great as the 10th Doctor once again. Freema Agyeman as new companion Martha Jones, I think is very underrated. She's a very good actor, and she brings a lot of variety to her performance as Martha Jones. She can be funny, she can also be emotional, so I think she does a really good job. Now, I have heard some people say that Martha Jones is basically Rose 2, because there's quite a lot of similarities between Martha Jones and Rose Tyler in the sense that Martha, much like Rose, is in love with the Doctor, and that is one element of Martha's character that I don't like. For the majority of this series, Martha is just in love with the Doctor and trying to make him fall in love with her. That is something I don't like about her character. However, I do think that she gets redemption, especially in the concluding three-parter. We see her building confidence as a character. She gets character development, and I think she leaves the TARDIS at the end of this series a much stronger character than when she entered the TARDIS, so I think that's a good thing. In terms of the story arc for this series, showrunner Russell T Davies once again uses words and phrases to connect episodes together. In this series, we get the recurring phrase of Harold Saxon and the idea that there is an election going on in the UK. That's actually very interesting. That is referenced a lot. So when we come to the realization in the concluding three-parter that the Master is actually Harold Saxon and he's taken control of the UK and the Earth more in general, I think that was a really good thing. The story arc works well and it connects all those episodes together, especially as we get references to the Shakespeare Code and Human Nature and The Family of Blood in the concluding three-parter. It helps make those episodes relevant, so I think that's a really good thing. Series 3 is a strong series. The main thing that I sometimes find difficult to watch about Series 3 is the Doctor treats Martha quite poorly, especially early on in this series. You just feel like he is trying to cope after the loss of Rose Tyler, and he's just not interested in Martha. He just is treating her very, very poorly, and that is true. I do think that their relationship does improve as the series goes on, and by the end of the series they are a firm unit. However, in the early series, the Doctor does treat Martha quite bad, and it makes the Doctor hard to love at times, I do have to say. Now I'm going to get into each individual episode of Series 3 and give a little mini review on each of those episodes. The Runaway Bride, the second Doctor Who Christmas special, and if you ask me, it does everything a Doctor Who Christmas special should do. It's fun, it's exciting, and it's also a bit more light-hearted. And I think after the emotional roller coaster which was Doomsday, we needed a bit more light-hearted in this Christmas special. I like the fact that Rose Tyler's departure casts such a dark shadow over this special. We can see that the Doctor is basically in mourning. You can see there are so many callbacks in this Christmas special to the fact that he is missing Rose, and I think that's really good because it highlights that the Doctor really did care about Rose and maybe even loved her. We'll never know. Catherine Tate as Donna Noble, is amazing in this special. Her performance as Donna, she brings so many comedic moments and it works really well. However, there is emotion there as well, especially when we discover that Donna's husband-to-be, Lance, is actually working with the enemy. You can see in Donna's face that she's devastated about that because she really loved Lance and she didn't realise that Lance was actually going to betray her this whole time. I think that through Catherine Tate's performance, I can see that Donna Noble is basically a companion in waiting at the end of this special, and it's understandable why so many fans, myself included, were won over by Donna Noble because Catherine Tate gives such a strong performance. The relationship between the Doctor and Donna is funny. I think it's different enough from the Doctor and Rose, so we can see what the 10th Doctor would be like with other companions, and I think him and Donna do work well together. There are so many funny moments which have me laughing out loud in this special, and that's always a good thing. The car chase is phenomenal. That's one scene in this Christmas special that I really like. It's intense. It feels like an action movie, and that's a really good thing. The Rachnos, the main villain of the Runaway Bride, is a bit over the top. However, for a more light-hearted Christmas special, I do think it works. I like the Rachnos. It has a very unique design, and just for the prosthetics and the practical effects in general, they make that creature look real, which is always a great thing. I also like the fact that the Donna stops the Doctor from going too far. She says, look, enough. You need to leave this now. And I think that's great because it highlights that the Doctor is still a very complex character, and sometimes he can go too far, which is why, as Donna says, he needs someone to stop him going too far, which I think is a good message. It ends in a Christmas orientated way with snow, which I think is a really good thing. That's one thing I like about Davies' Christmas specials. They always come across very Christmassy, which is always a good thing. Overall, I enjoy The Runaway Bride. It's not as strong as the previous Christmas special, The Christmas Invasion. However, that would be hard to beat. I enjoy The Runaway Bride. As I said, it's exciting, it's fun, it has very memorable characters, good action scenes, a memorable villain, and it's more light-hearted, which is a good thing. Smith and Jones offers us a fun introduction to a new companion. We learn everything about Martha Jones's life within the first 5 minutes of this episode, which I think is a really good thing. And Davies did a very clever thing as well, because instead of Martha just sitting there and telling us what her life is like, instead we see what her life is like. We see the dynamic between her family. We also see what job she does. So I think that was very clever and a more unique approach Davies took to introducing Martha Jones. The premise of the episode, the idea of the hospital being on the moon, I think is really good. It's not one of those it's going to destroy the entire Earth type episodes. However, it is a threat, and the Doctor and Martha do need to deal with a problem. This episode dedicates a lot of time to building up the dynamic between the Doctor and Martha, so we understand exactly how they would work as the Doctor and a companion. So I think that's good. The episode dedicates quite a bit of time to this. You can see throughout this episode actually that Martha impresses the Doctor. She asks the right questions and she's quite capable of thinking for herself as well. And you can see that the Doctor is impressed. So you understand why at the end of this episode, Martha has become worthy in the Doctor's eyes of becoming his companion. I like the Jadoon in this episode. They're a very unique villain. They got a great design, and it's understandable why they returned, because in this episode, they are the standouts in my personal opinion. I enjoy Smith and Jones a lot. It's a fun episode. I think it was right to dedicate most of it to the Doctor and Martha because we can understand how they're going to work, as they're going to be carrying most of the series. So I enjoy Smith and Jones. I think it's a good introduction to Martha as a companion. The Shakespeare Code is one of the weaker episodes of Series 3, and that's for two specific reasons. The first is the Doctor is very unlikable in this episode. He keeps making reference to what Rose would do in this situation. And I feel sorry for Martha because she's just joined the Doctor on his travels and all he keeps going on about is Rose. So I do find that quite annoying. It does make the Doctor unlikable. It does make you feel sorry for Martha as well. And the second reason is the witches are not great villains. I find them cringy most of the time, and they're just not very memorable. They don't appear as that much of a threat, so I'm not a massive fan of the witches. There are some things to like about this episode. I like Shakespeare, the actor nailed the role, and the costumes and props used really add an authenticity to the episode. It really does feel like Elizabethan England, so I think that was a great thing. When you're doing a historical episode, it's good to have historical accuracy. I also think that the plot is a little stupid. I like the concept of words can be powerful. However, the conclusion just feels like a massive anticlimax. So I'm not a massive fan of the Shakespeare Code, primarily because I'm not a massive fan of the villain. Plus, I think the Doctor is a bit of a dick towards Martha in this episode. Gridlock is an underrated episode. I like the fact that Martha is separated from the Doctor because she has to think and act independently without the Doctor there to support her, which I think is an important aspect of a companion. We're introduced to a wide variety of characters in this episode, especially on the motorway, and I think that's strong because they all come across as real and genuine people. Just by their cars, you can kind of understand what their personality is like, which I think is a good thing because they feel like real people. The concept of this episode I've always found outstanding. Now, I might be wrong, however, for me, the idea of them all being on the motorway and not minding is kind of like the concept of the American dream. They're all on there and they're all in a traffic jam, however, they don't care because what's at the end of the traffic jam in their eyes is the idea of paradise, a fresh start for all of them. And I think that's a really good thing because a lot of people work their entire life doing jobs that they don't like because they believe that at the end of it, they will reach paradise. And I think that's what this episode symbolises. That is, at least for me. I like the face of Bo's revelation in this film that you are not alone. I think that's great. That adds a lot of mystery to the series going forward, especially as you can see the Doctor's reaction. Tennant does a great job with that. And speaking of Tennant and the 10th Doctor, his speech about Gallifrey at the end of this episode is amazing. It's once again one of those things, it tells us in words more than images could ever show us. I think the Doctor's description of Gallifrey is amazing. It really does create this impression that Gallifrey is this godlike utopia, which is the equivalent, the Doctor's equivalent of paradise. I've always been a massive fan of Gridlock. I think it's a great episode. The Doctor and Martha are separated, but they both have a lot to do. And just the concept of this episode in general, I think is really strong. Daleks in Manhattan is okay. It's the first episode in a two-parter, so it's kind of setting up stuff for the next episode. However, apart from that, it's not really doing a lot. I like the ideas of the Great Depression. Hugh Qureshi as the man who is in charge of Hooverville. I think he gives a good performance in this, and he really does advertise the fact that the Great Depression was hard on a lot of workers. I think that's always a good thing. Andrew Garfield is in this as well. That always amazes me about Doctor Who, when you can get actors who, of course, now are massive Hollywood stars. However, you can see them in, just like in 2007, Andrew Garfield was in Doctor Who. 5 years later, he would be playing Spider-Man. So it really does show you that you never know what actors are really going to make it big. So that's always something I've enjoyed about this. I like the fact that the Doctor is trying to figure out who is behind the disappearances. Of course, the viewers know it's the Daleks. I somehow think that the revelation would have been better if we hadn't known that the Daleks were behind it all along. You know, if we found out when the 10th Doctor is, maybe that could have been a lot better. However, saying that, the cliffhanger at the end of this episode is really strong. I remember watching this and seeing the idea of the human Dalek, and I was gobsmacked. It was like, oh my God. That is something new. And I think because the Daleks appear in pretty much every series of New Who, it's important that they give us new ideas. And the idea of the human Dalek was something new at the time. So I think they handled that very well. Although the reason that I don't rank Daleks in Manhattan very highly is because I just think it's a setup for the next episode. Evolution of the Daleks is far better than Daleks in Manhattan for the simple reason it's a lot more fast-paced, there's a lot more going on. I like that this episode gets intense at times. The standoff between Hooverville and the pig slaves I think is really strong. It adds an action-packed element to the episode. I also really enjoy the human Dalek. He has a great design anyway, however I do like the fact that he begins to question himself and the Daleks more generally. I like the fact that he basically says to the Doctor, look, the Daleks' quest to be the supreme being has led us to extinction. We need to adapt in order to survive. And I like the fact that the Doctor, even though you could tell throughout this episode through Tennant's performance that he has pure hatred for the Daleks, he's willing to help them change for the better, which I think is really good. It highlights the Doctor in a positive light there. Solomon's death is an amazing scene. I mean, his speech is very emotional anyway. However, the fact that the Daleks just decide to kill him highlights that the Daleks don't have any emotion. They don't care. They're not going to be swayed by an emotional speech by a human. They will kill them because humans are different and the Daleks are the supreme race. I think the evolution of the Daleks is underrated because it highlights that the Daleks, even when they are offered a chance to change and adapt, will not, because they firmly believe they are the supreme being and that everything else should be exterminated. So I think evolution of the Daleks is underrated. Plus, one of the Daleks gets away. So we know for a fact that the Daleks would return. And you can understand why Martha says to the Doctor at the end, look, I know how much it meant to you that that Dalek got away. And the Doctor's just like, they'll be back. He knows they're going to be back. The Lazarus Experiment is an episode I would love to see released now because I feel like the innovations we've had in technology would make this episode a lot better. Now, I like that this episode gives us a chance to get to know Martha's family. Compared to Rose and her family, we barely know anything about Martha's, so I think it was wise to introduce Martha's family more in this episode. I like the fact that Martha's mum automatically doesn't like the Doctor. I think that's great because it highlights that Martha's mum knows that there's something dangerous about the Doctor, and when she's told by one of Harold Saxon's aides more about the Doctor, you can understand why she becomes more involved in the series story arc. I like the concept of this episode. The idea, as the Doctor says, some people do more in 20 years than some do in 80. I think that's a really nice message that you cannot change. You can't change nature. Everyone is going to die and you cannot prolong that. I think that's a great message. Lazarus as a villain, I enjoy him. Mark Gatiss does give a good performance in the role. The main problem I have with his character and the episode more in general is the CGI does let it down. It's not good. The CGI is pretty bad. Probably some of the worst since the revival. And the main thing I don't understand is they show this CGI a lot. They show the Lazarus monster quite a lot in this episode as if they were proud of it. And maybe back then they were. However, it is fair to say they overreached themselves with that CGI. It didn't look good at the time, really. It looks even more dated now. That's what I'd love to see this episode released in today, because I feel like with the advances they've had in CGI, the Lazarus monster would look a lot better. And also this episode is memorable for the fact that the Doctor finally offers Martha a permanent position as his companion in the TARDIS, which I think is good as well. I think this is the episode in which the Doctor finally starts treating Martha right. As I said before, in the Shakespeare Code, he weren't treating her very well at all. However, by this episode, I think their dynamic works now. The Doctor has started to just put Rose in the back of his mind and just focusing on Martha as his companion. So I do think their dynamic starts to change from this episode, which is a good thing. 42 is the first episode written by Chris Chibnall, my good old friend Chris Chibnall. Now, if you've watched this channel for a while, you might know my thoughts on Chris Chibnall. However, you will be glad to know that I tried to just blur out the fact that Chibnall wrote this episode and tried to look at it through an objective lens. And I have to say, it was a novel concept, the idea that the Doctor, Martha and the crew are 42 minutes away from death. However, I do think it's this concept which lets the episode down because it feels way too rushed. We're not given a chance to really understand any of the crew because, of course, it's too focused on the plot and the idea of trying to save the ship from crashing into the sun. Now, the idea of the sun being sentient and alive is quite interesting. However, much like the crew, we're not given enough time to really understand and explore this concept because we're too focused on saving the ship from crashing into the sun. So it just feels far too rushed. And to be honest, despite the countdown, I weren't on the edge of my seat throughout this episode. I knew that they were going to survive, so I weren't really that bothered. It didn't really keep me on the edge of my seat, which is not good. That's what I suppose this episode was trying to do. Overall, 42 is rushed. The idea of 42 minutes is a novel concept, don't get me wrong, but the problem is it's too focused on the plot, and therefore it just comes across as rushed, just completely rushed. Human nature has you gripped from the off as you're wondering, who the hell is John Smith and why does he look like the Doctor? This episode just has you invested and on the edge of your seat throughout, which is amazing. I like that Martha is given a pivotal role in the story. She's given more responsibility than she's ever had before. And I like that she is the one who is basically the main focus of this episode, because the Doctor can't help, because the Doctor thinks he's John Smith. So Martha has to do everything herself, which I think is good. She has to work independently. John Smith and Joan's relationship actually works. There's good chemistry between the actors, so that relationship does feel natural. However, saying that, I do find Martha annoying a little bit because she's jealous of the Doctor and Joan's relationship. She's like, oh, you had to become human and you had to fall in love with a human and that human weren't me. It's like, Martha, please just get over yourself. He is not interested in you in that way. So that's a little bit annoying, I have to admit. However, apart from that, all other stuff Martha does in this episode is amazing. The family of blood are great villains. Especially the son. He gives such an over-the-top performance that it just works brilliantly. He's amazing. He steals the show in this story, if you ask me. I love the scarecrows. They have a great design, and plus they're quite a scary villain as well, so I do think that works. And the cliffhanger. My God, the cliffhanger for this episode. John Smith has to choose between Joan or Martha, and of course he does not have a clue who the Doctor is, so that is amazing. I was like gobsmacked, even though I know now. I've watched this episode so many times. Even when I rewatched it recently in preparation for this review, I was on the edge of my seat like, oh my God, who the hell is he going to choose? Obviously I know what's going to happen, but that's great if you can rewatch an episode and still get excited over it. That just shows that you're watching a bloody good episode, and human nature really is. The Family of Blood is an intense episode, and it has you on the edge of your seat from start to finish. And in my opinion, The Family of Blood is just a prime example of how fantastic Doctor Who can be when it's firing on all cylinders. I like the fact that for the majority of this episode, Martha is just trying to convince John Smith that he does not exist, that they need the Doctor. I feel so sorry for Joan in this episode, especially when she realises that John Smith doesn't actually exist. The man of her dreams is fake, that he is just the Doctor and can't remember. I think that's great. You actually feel heartbreak for Joan in this episode. I love the action scene when the kids are shooting out with the scarecrows. That is an amazing scene, so underrated because it highlights the tragedy of war. When you see all the kids shooting these guns crying, you understand that these kids don't enjoy killing. And when you figure out that this episode is set just before the First World War and that the majority of those kids are going to end up killing other soldiers, I think it's an amazing and very emotional scene, and I think it works really well. The Family of Blood are once again amazing villains, especially the son, Baines. He is one of my favourite villains in Doctor Who history. Such a memorable performance there, and I would love to see the Family of Blood return because I think they were amazing in this two-parter. One of the best scenes in this episode is when John Smith contemplates becoming the Doctor again, and he lashes out at Martha saying, what the hell do you do for him? You want me to become lonely, you want me to become a god, I just want to be normal and live with Joan and have a good life. And I think that is an amazing scene, because for me it shows Tennant at his best. He's portraying such a different character to what he usually does as the Doctor. It's just amazing. I loved Tennant in this episode, and I think that scene is one of my favourite 10th Doctor scenes because it's just so different to what Tennant's used to doing, and therefore it's just amazing. The idea, I didn't mention this in Human Nature, however, the idea of the Fog Watch rewriting a Time Lord's DNA is a very interesting concept, and of course it's brought up again in the series finale. So I think it's good. It was an interesting concept already. However, the fact that it's introduced in the series finale as well, I think is a really good thing. Plus, we're highlighted once more that the 10th Doctor does have a dark side. When you consider the punishments he gives the family of blood is amazing. It highlights that the 10th Doctor is dark and he is not afraid to dish out punishments to those who cross him. I think that's a very amazing scene. Overall, The Family of Blood is a fantastic episode. Combined it with Human Nature is probably my favourite two-parter since the revival of Doctor Who. It's an amazing two-parter. It shows Doctor Who at its best, and in my opinion, it's one of the greatest Doctor Who stories of all time. Blink is often considered one of the strongest episodes in Doctor Who history. It often ranks at least number 1 or number 2 on Doctor Who episode rankings. And I think it's pretty easy to see why. Blink is a fantastic episode. It is probably most memorable for introducing the villain of the Weeping Angels. And it's very clear to see why they became iconic after this episode, because they are scary as hell. Especially in this episode. There are a number of moments in this episode when I'm sitting there watching going, oh jeez, because you just see the Weeping Angels move and it's just brilliant. Such a tense atmosphere. Carrie Mulligan as Sally Sparrow is fantastic. I would have loved to have seen Sally Sparrow become a full-time companion because she does amazing on her own. So imagine what she would be like with the Doctor. That would just be amazing. Bring Sally Sparrow back because she was a great character. I also like all the side characters they introduce in this episode as well, because even though you don't see them a lot, they are made likeable. Moffat makes them likeable, which is always a great thing. And that's another thing. Stephen Moffat, the writer of this episode, did an amazing job with the plot. There's hardly any plot holes in this episode. It all feels connected, and I think that's a great thing. It keeps you invested and on the edge of your seat throughout. I also like the fact that the Doctor does not appear a lot in this episode. It's a very Doctor-like story, which I think is a good thing, because the moments that the Doctor are in this episode, especially when he's reading the manuscript and saying about how to defeat the Weeping Angels, that's quite memorable as well. However, I like the fact that the Doctor isn't heavily involved. It's more about ordinary people trying to defeat the Weeping Angels. Plus, I like the score in this episode. Murray Gold did an amazing job with the score in this episode. It gives a very creepy feel to the episode, which I think is a really good thing. I'm going to just say now, because I haven't mentioned it in the previous Doctor Who series reviews, Murray Gold has done an amazing job with the score of Doctor Who up until now, and he always did. In this episode especially, I like what he does with the scary elements of this episode. Overall, Blink is a fantastic episode of Doctor Who. I like that it's a Doctor-like episode. It highlights that you can have a Doctor-like episode if you have great characters and a very iconic villain, which Blink does have. Utopia has you gripped from the start as we head to the end of the universe, where even the Doctor has not been before. So that immediately has you gripped and on the edge of your seat. John Barrowman returns as Captain Jack, and he's amazing. He just has so much charisma, and that role, he's just made it his own, so he does a great job. Actually, I really enjoyed the Doctor, Martha and Captain Jack. I think they work very well as a team. However, I do feel sorry for Martha as they keep going on about how great Rose was, so that is a little annoying. I like the idea of Utopia, the concept that even humans at the end of the universe still live in hope of a paradise, a utopia where they can go, where life will be better. It's kind of like the concept they did in Gridlock as well, just on a grander scale in Utopia. So I do like that concept that humanity, even at the end of the universe, are still trying to survive. Derek Jacobi as Professor Yana does amazing. He makes such a sympathetic character that the plot twist that he is actually the master is amazing, because you would not have thought it. I like the callback to the idea of the fog watch. It helps create links between the series episodes, which I think works really well. Plus, I would have loved to have seen Derek Jacobi portray the Master a bit more. We see him for like 5 minutes as the Master instead of Professor Yana in this episode, and he does an amazing job with that. However, saying that, John Simm, who Derek Jacobi regenerates into, instantly impresses as the Master. Even though he does not get a lot of screen time in this episode, you can understand immediately that Simm was so well cast for the role of the Master. I love the cliffhanger in this episode. The last 5 minutes of this episode are absolutely intense. Through Tennant's performance, you understand how much it means to him that he is not the last of the Time Lords and that he knows that it is the Master who has survived. And the fact that the Master runs off with the TARDIS really does leave you like, oh my God, the Master's back. The Doctor is not the last of the Time Lords, and now he's lost his TARDIS. How the hell are the Doctor, Martha and Captain Jack going to get out of this? Which is great. That's exactly what an opening episode to a three-parter should do. It should have you on the edge of your seat and eagerly anticipating the next episode. The sound of drums is very different from the tone of Utopia. However, that doesn't mean it's not a bad episode. I would actually say it's even better than Utopia. For the main reason, John Simm brings an insanity to the role of the Master. There are so many funny moments in this episode involving the Master which really highlight he is insane. I also like the twist that the Master is Harold Saxon. Of course, the name Harold Saxon had been referenced throughout Series 3. It had been the main pinpoint of the story arc. Therefore, the revelation that it's actually the Master who is Harold Saxon works really well and is a great twist. I like that this episode kind of has a thriller vibe about it. The Doctor, Martha and Captain Jack are simply on the run. They're trying to figure out what the Master is up to, as well as having to contemplate with being the UK's most wanted criminals, which I think is a great thing. The idea that the Master has basically won. He is Prime Minister. He is in full control is great because the Doctor, Martha and Captain Jack really are the underdogs in this episode, I have to say. I like the repetitive drum beat. I like that it's worked into the score because it does get in your head, the repetitive drum beat, I have to say. I also like the idea of the Archangel Network influencing people to vote for Harold Saxon. I think that was an interesting idea and highlights that, you know, the Master, even though he is quite charismatic, he would still need technology in order to influence people, in order to manipulate them, in order to vote for him. One of my standout scenes in The Sound of Drums is the phone conversation between the Doctor and the Master, because I think it highlights to me that they used to be old friends. They go back a long way and you can see them reminiscing about the Time War and about each other more generally. And I think that's a great scene. Tennant and Simm do an amazing job in that scene and they sell it, I do have to admit. Plus, the cliffhanger of The Sound of Drums is epic. The fact that the Master is fully in control and then decides to wipe out 10% of the human population is amazing, because it honestly feels like there is no hope. There is only Martha. The Doctor has been defeated. He's been turned into an old man. All of Martha's family have been taken hostage and the population is being wiped out. Such an intense cliffhanger, which really does have you on the edge of your seat thinking, oh my God, how the hell are they going to save the world? How can this, how can it happen? The Master has won. He's in control of Earth now. So how are they going to win? And I think with a three-parter, sometimes you can lose the enthusiasm for the simple reason, if it goes on for too long, you can kind of say, oh, it's getting a little bit boring now. I just want to see it round up. The cliffhanger to The Sound of Drums does keep you invested because it puts it up a gear. Utopia's cliffhanger was strong as well. However, The Sound of Drums cliffhanger is just in a different league. So I love the cliffhanger for The Sound of Drums. It's a great episode anyway, but that cliffhanger makes it that much better. Last of the Time Lords is a good series finale. However, I would say it's Tennant's weakest series finale. Now, what do I enjoy about Last of the Time Lords? Well, Martha Jones. She is amazing in this episode. We finally get to see Martha act as a proper companion. As this is set a year after the Master took control of Earth, we really see that Martha has grown as a character. And as she's the main focus of this episode, I think Martha grows more in this single episode than she has throughout the entire series, which is always a great thing. The reveal of the Toclafane as the future of the human race is a great twist. It really does tie this three-parter together because it calls back to what happened in Utopia. So I think that was done really well. The Master is once again a great villain. John Simm did an amazing job in that role. And I think he makes this three-parter better because of how great he is as the Master. However, I do have some problems regarding the plot of this episode. For the simple reason, to me personally, it does feel a little bit far-fetched. Now, I like the callback to the Shakespeare Code, the idea that words can be powerful, and if people all think the same word at the same time, then it can bring hope and give the Doctor power. I like that idea. However, I just think it feels a bit far-fetched, especially as I feel like Davies had boxed himself into a corner there that he didn't really know how to get out of it. And while Captain Jack blowing up the paradox machine does destroy the paradox, it does feel like, oh well, so basically we couldn't stay like this because obviously the Earth was pretty much destroyed, so we just went back in time so that it never happened. So that does feel a little bit far-fetched. I wouldn't go as far to say it feels like an anticlimax because it doesn't. However, it does feel a little bit far-fetched, which is why the finale doesn't rank as highly as Tennant's other finales, I would say. Saying that, the Master's death I think is great. Tennant, for me, sells that scene as the Doctor because he's just so desperate not to be alone, and you can feel the emotion, which is great. Plus, I like that Martha decides that she doesn't want to travel with the Doctor anymore, that their relationship is actually not very healthy, and she nearly lost her family, so she wants to be there to support them. I think that's amazing because Martha is one of the few companions to leave on her own terms, which I think is why that really does highlight that she's not Rose too. Yes, she was in love with the Doctor, that is true. However, she was strong enough to walk away from the Doctor when she wanted to. And I like her for that, I have to admit. So in conclusion, Doctor Who Series 3 has a lot going for it. David Tennant gives some of his most varied and emotional performances as the 10th Doctor, and I really enjoy his character in this series. It works really, really well. Billie Piper was a hard act to follow. However, I believe that Freema Agyeman as Martha Jones does an amazing job. One reason I think that Martha Jones is a very underrated companion is because her character is developed throughout this series. So she's a very different character at the end of this series than when she started out. And she actually decides to leave the TARDIS on her own terms, which I think is something that she should really be praised for more. The story arc of Series 3 is also really strong. Showrunner and head writer Russell T Davies once again uses the ideas of words and phrases to reference episodes together. The series finale actually connects a lot of these episodes together. You would have to watch the majority of the episodes in Series 3 in order to understand the series finale, which I think is a really good thing because it means that the viewer will have to watch every episode, which is a great thing. While I do enjoy the story arc, there are occasional episodes which are a bit more average. However, some of the episodes in Series 3 are some of the greatest Doctor Who episodes ever made. I'm talking The Family of Blood 2-parter and Blink. Phenomenal stories which really do raise the standard of Series 3 as a whole. I've heard a lot of debate about whether Series 3 really is included in the golden age of Doctor Who. For me, personally, of course it is. It's an amazing series and I would definitely recommend it. And that is why Doctor Who Series 3 gets a very well-deserved Grade 1 ranking. It's a phenomenal series and in my opinion, it's first-rate Who. So thanks for watching, guys. I really do hope you enjoyed my Doctor Who Series 3 review. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe in order to receive great and maybe even improved quality content in the future. Now, if you're waiting for my Doctor Who Series 4 review, that will be released just before Christmas. So I hope you look forward to that and I will see you in another one. See ya!